So this is the teaching of the co-creation wheel. Little history behind this wheel. We'll try and keep that part short. But this is the model that many of the spiritual elders on the planet are using. Now, none of them, to my knowledge, has indicated how to use this wheel in a real sense. Those that know the history of the co-creation wheel may note that the coloring on this wheel is different than the one that is currently being used by the other elders. All the words are the same, but the coloring scheme is different. You may refer to the old one if you wish, but my advice, if you want to learn how to use the wheel, is to use it with the accompanying coloring scheme, beginning with the red in the center, which is your base chakra, and going out through each aspect of your physical, mental, emotional, spiritual self as you go through each of the chakras. And what you come to understand or know about the chakras is up to each one of you to know whether or not you have a belief structure around each chakra. This coloring scheme helps you explore that understanding. So the point is, how do we come to use this? How do we use it? And the problem is that most people have not ever used it. They refer to it, but they don't use it. And I'm going to suggest a process for using it effectively. And it's only a process. Maybe others have a different way of interpreting it. I have not heard anyone enunciate this yet. So the way I look at the wheel is, first I see it's a worldview. It's a whole system design. It's something that covers and ought to cover everything. Everything. So if we're looking at how do we use it? First, I recommend you pick at least 4 areas to think about at the same time. You can't think on any one individually, but that will take you a long time to get through and see the relevance of each to the other. Most reductionist thinkers will just go in the, well, I'll do justice first, and then I'll do health second, and you follow around the wheel and you pick an order. So how do you pick the order? That's the first step. Do you start with justice, or do you start with governance, or do you start with economics, or do you start with infrastructure? Where do you start? Each individual will have their own idea of where you start, but I would suggest that in selecting your first 4, because I think we should break it into 3 systems of 4. We want to stick to the design of the medicine wheel, where you have the physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual in each analysis. So we look at what I did when I looked at this. First, you tune yourself to the coloring scheme. You try and relate to the coloring scheme. And it's good if you're doing this for the first time to have some nice music in the background. Something like Beethoven. It's very relaxing, inspiring kind of music stuff. So we select 4 to begin with, and what I selected was from my own choice. You may select 4 others, but Education was a important one for me. Economics was another important one for me. Education, economics. Spirituality. Education, economics, spirituality. And media. I'm going to take those as my first analysis using this publicly. Economics, education, spirituality, and media. Okay. So the first step in, after you've made that selection, you could go and select the next four if you liked, and then the next four. That's what a reductionist mind might do. But I suggest that we just do those first four, and we'll see as we look deeply into each of our own understandings of economics, education, spirituality, and media. Because we have some biases in our understanding of each of the notions. And so let's look at our spiritual bias for a moment. We'll start with our spiritual bias. If I think of my spiritual understandings and I look at the coloring scheme and I go back from a spiritual, physical sense, how do I, like right down at my base chakra, how do I feel about my spiritualness? And that's what people awaken when they do Kundalini. So I don't really know Kundalini other than I'm aware of it and the exercises that one does that connects your physical body to your spiritual body. And there's a series of exercises. So we can go through those or go and leave that for the moment and just know that there is steps to be taken to fully use this wheel. So we use the coloring in each of the areas. So let's skip over for a moment to education. How do we feel about education? Well, for me, education, we have the hugest impasse in the world in trying to educate the world in one word. Poe. Poe. It's amazing how much difficulty we've had in teaching people Poe, when it's probably the most simple idea to understand that one could imagine. Imagine a word that doesn't mean yes, doesn't mean no. There's no bias in the question when you say Poe. Poe means I respect what you're saying, but can you say it to me in another way so I may more fully understand you? And Poe. So you might Poe every idea that I might express to you in my medicine wheel. Because this is my medicine wheel that I'm talking about now, using education, economics, spirituality, and the media. So how do we use our understanding of those four things at the same time? We can analyze each one separately, but what do we know about economics and media? Wow. We do recall, and this has to do with education, we do recall when we were successful at the United Nations in bringing forth the notion that attached to all rights, there's an inherent responsibility attached to the claiming of those rights. We know this is in international documents because we had that phrase put into the 1993 Vienna Conference on Human Rights. Since that time, you will see in international documents the notion rights and responsibilities. Prior to our getting that passed, it was not in our lexicon of language. So right now, if we look at how do we use our understanding of that idea and look at the economics of it, and how do we let people understand the notion that rights and responsibilities are inherently attached to each other. How do we do that? Rights and responsibilities. And at what level do we do it? Ought we not do it at the United Nations level? Ought we not? With the UN resident coordinator? So this wheel will have to be understood by United Nations resident coordinators, because we want them to use the highest model for looking at worldview and whole system design. So if we could go on and on in talking about the different aspects of how media and spirituality, education and economics work just on their own. But let's just, for sake of this lesson, let's look at arts, governance, health, and infrastructure. Well, when we were looking at the first four things, we are actually in our minds probably looked at all the different aspects of the 12. We may not have looked at it through a conscious thought, but subconsciously we were connecting as we were talking about economics, education, spirituality, and media. If you think about each of those areas, let's do media for a second. When we were successful in getting rights and responsibilities attached to each other in international documents, the media chose to ignore that accomplishment because it, in a way, infringed on their current way of using and claiming the rights to freedom of speech. The notion must be accepted that, and this is what our worldview is that if it ain't good for the whole world, why are we doing it? You know, or, you know, set yourself aside as a singular nation state activist, because that's what the system is activating itself against whole world system design. We're not talking about a unitary government system either. We're talking about a distribution system of the resources on the planet in a more equitable way. And we do that by changing the very systems of distribution. Forget about the governance for a moment. Just look to the systems of distribution. Once we have the systems of distribution in order, the governance will fall in line in each area that has its responsibility for doing what needs to be done in order that the whole world system operates. You know, so when do you bring in governance? Do you bring it in at the beginning or at the end? Well, it has to be involved in every issue anyways. So and if you look through each idea as we explore how each idea affects us, we immediately see that there's another area where, gee, wouldn't it be good to know what people think in that area? So quite quickly we can move out of education into justice. What's justice? How is justice actualized? Physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. How do we have justice on our planet when we haven't practiced enough of the processes of reconciliation? This is on a global level and also on a local level in Canada, where we've had our own unique problems with the method of distribution of funding to the Indigenous peoples. Our processes are really are questionable to this day. So this is another way of looking. You look at this worldview and you can bring it right home into wherever you live. I'm thinking like now, about how it brings me from looking at the global picture, how this happens in imagine in every country, we have someone that is working with our same worldview. And within that worldview, we're going to establish distribution systems for knowledge and information. Using at all times, all aspects of in our analysis. And then we will bring into the question of how we look at each thing through the filter of 10 questions, which will work with Poe. So this is the end of the first explanation of how to use the wheel. The second situation will be described after this break.